what we do in life. It goes in eternity.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
These guys are hammers, and to hammers everything looks like nails.
I heard that.
You were meant to. So you see something that's important, you call it out, and we'll make it happen.
Okay. Mother Nature is a serial killer. No one's better, more creative. Like all serial killers, she can't help the urge to want to get caught. What good are all those brilliant crimes if no one takes the credit? So she leaves crumbs. Now the hard part is seeing the crumbs for the clues they are. Sometimes the thing you thought was the most brutal aspect turns out to be the chink in its armor. And she loves disguising her weaknesses as strengths.
If you can fight, fight.
Head north if you can. Hello? Is there anyone out there hearing this?
Help each other.
Mexico City has been declared complete loss.
Be prepared for anything. Our war has just begun.
We are the hammers, and we are the nails. The world stands upon the precipice of total insanity, and we need you, and we hope you need us, bringing information, news, and as much truth as we can eke out before Mother Nature turns us to crumbs. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, working to become millions of voices singing in unison to bring the sanity back home.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Did you ever feel that things were not quite right? That everything was just ever so slightly askew?
Do you have, to paraphrase Morpheus, a splinter in your mind?
If you're interested in hearing the latest information about UFOs, the paranormal,
ancient cultures and structures,
monatomic elements,
longevity,
fantastic discoveries in science,
downloaded to your brain,
then tune into us. Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mackie.
And we are Shiny Side Out, Sundays 2 to 4 a.m. Eastern. See you then.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here. Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk Now Radio, listener-supported radio, where no topic is taboo, and your support keeps it that way. Brought to you by Revolution Radio, listener-supported radio, where information never sleeps. And this is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is Thomas Fusco, and we're going to be talking about the supergeometric theory of everything, including paranormal phenomena. And if you would like to learn more about Thomas and his work, you can, and his book as well, you can always go to www.cosmicveil, that's COSMICVEIL.com, and he's got all the information about his work and his theories, his contact information. He's even got a free chapter you can read on it over there, a place to order the book, the whole 9 yards, his upcoming radio appearances. Feel free to visit that and get to know him a little bit better. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and paste the link in the chat room. I noticed he had did it earlier, but it's scrolled up since then, so let's post it for newcomers that may not have seen it when he posted it earlier. Thomas, how are you doing today?
Oh, very good, Roy. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you on, Thomas. I mean, I think it's something like the third time or so that we've done an interview. The other two are over at my site on the Talk Now Radio. That's not part of Revolution. But we had interesting shows together that kind of made the rounds around the internet there. And, you know, I think we always do well together.
Well, I've always enjoyed being a guest on your show. And, of course, you're very well known in the field. So I always appreciate the opportunity to appear and talk with you about my ideas and theories.
Okay. Now, like I say, we've discussed this here supergeometric theory of everything before, but not for these people who are not familiar with it. Why don't we start out by you telling everybody a little something about yourself and what exactly got you interested in this particular line of research?
Well, I'm an independent researcher, and essentially what got me involved in this particular line of work was a couple of experiences I had in my late teens and early 20s. People might call them parapsychological or psychic or, you know, something along those lines. But those things caused me to call into question the model of physical reality that I was taught in physics. And so consequently, when you experience such things on a profound level and come to the understanding that they're no longer hypotheticals or philosophical, they're very real. For me, the question became, how can we describe the universe in a way that accommodates these kind of phenomena? How is the universe actually put together? And what would supernatural phenomena tell us about that construction that we really don't already know in established physics? And would that new model be able to answer other questions in physics rather than just dealing with the paranormal or the supernatural? And so for me, the quest became to find that particular conceptual model that would make all those things work and come together under one umbrella, so to speak. And that basically is the theory of supergeometry. And when I felt I had it in a good enough form to go public with it, that's when I published back in 2011.
Now, your book, it actually goes into detail about the whole entire theory and all its facets, kind of like a written blueprint on it?
Yes. It takes a very broad approach, though, in that we're also dealing with other classes of phenomena, like scientific anomalies, quantum physics, certain aspects of astrophysics, as well as the paranormal, and even traditional religious concepts and religious beliefs. So it's a very broad-based approach, which is kind of unique in the paranormal, because rather than addressing the paranormal directly itself, the paranormal becomes a body of data, an important collection of observation that are added to other observations from different fields, so that we could put them together and essentially build an entire structure out of that.
Okay. Now, what I'm hearing now, if I'm understanding this correctly, it could be a similar theory that may have been known to the ancients of Egypt and Samaria back when, alchemy was considered a science, when spirituality and science was conjoined together. Do you think there's a possibility that what you come up with could be some kind of a ancient lost knowledge?
Well, I don't know whether it's so much a revelation of an ancient knowledge, but I think what it is the first workable answer to a question that has taken on many forms over the ages, that many people have had a sense that all things are connected, so to speak, or that the supernatural is somehow tied in with normal reality. And as I said, those kinds of questions have been around for a long time, and there's been various philosophies to address it. But there has never really been a scientific theory on that level that also makes predictions that are experimentally testable. So I would say the philosophy goes back a long ways, but the theoretical science of it is very, very new.
Okay. Well, can you kind of give us a outline of how the theory works without actually giving away the candy store, so to speak?
Well, I don't mind giving away the candy store. I mean, we could talk many hours about all the aspects of this and never truly cover it all. But in a very, very broad sense, what the conclusion is that I draw is that reality is more than what is physical. Now, that seems to be a pretty obvious statement for some, especially those who believe in a spirit realm, that type of thing. But in the book, it's cast in a very scientifically meaningful way. And this is one of the things that I've done with my work, is to take concepts that have been around a long time, but have been always cast either in a religious or philosophical or metaphysical way, and actually bring them down to hard science and phrasing them in a way that's scientifically relevant and meaningful. The current predominant belief in mainstream physics today, and we should probably call it a paradigm, is a paradigm of materialism. And what physics believes predominantly is that reality is the physical universe, and that the physical universe is reality, and that these are synonymous, and that nothing lies outside of that. Everything that is physical is reality, and everything that's reality is physical. But we do have a number of scientific anomalies today that lead us to a possible conclusion that reality is more than what is just physical. And, of course, the evidence of paranormal phenomena, if we're going to accept that as a valid body of data, also lends us to believe that there is something more to reality than just what is physical. And so this is basically the underlying concept that the universe is, or the reality is more than the physical universe. And then what we have to do is just simply go about looking for observations, hard observations and data that lend support to this kind of idea that there is more to to reality than the physical universe. And once we get those kinds of ideas established, then we can begin to form a model based on observation of what this other part of reality actually is, what it looks like, how it works, and how it relates to what we see and observe and experience. And that's the basic fundamental concept. I've used some very different approaches than what has typically been seen and people have read about and heard about. And as a result, it's very all-encompassing because it addresses a lot of different areas. And again, very important to specify is that supergeometrics is a scientific theory. I want to, emphasize that word scientific because most people who follow the alternative genre have heard all kinds of theories being talked about all the time for decades and decades. And to be honest with them, most of what you hear is not truly a theory. A theory is a word that has a very specific definition. And a theory comes from a hypothesis that answers all of the relevant questions posed to it in a consistent way, without making exceptions to its own rules, or without leaving anything that's critically significant on the table unanswered. That's what a theory is. It's a tested hypothesis. And then the other thing that a true theory does is that it makes predictions, not like Nostradamus predictions, Royce. You know that.
Yeah.
We're going to have a storm at 8 p.m. tonight. Not that kind of a thing, but predictions like if we were to conduct a particular kind of an experiment, this particular theory would predict a certain result to that experiment, whereas a competing theory would predict a different result for that experiment. And so when the experiment is ultimately conducted and the finding corresponds with the one theory, theory A, for example, then we know that theory B has been discredited and theory A has been bolstered. Einstein's theory of relativity, for example, we still call it a theory because we have not been able to test every aspect of it. There are certain consequences of Einstein's relativity that still are a bit beyond our ability to directly test them. However, everything we have tested so far shows that old Al was dead on. And he really opened up an aspect of physical reality that was just hardly conceived of in this time and has been proved over and over to be true. So my work does very similar things. I make actual predictions about experimental outcomes, and a few of them have actually been verified already. So this is something very different than what your audience is accustomed to hearing.
I see. Well, in the chat room, Thunderbird was saying Wilbert B. Smith was told that everything comes from nothing, that there are 12 dimensions, and that at the highest level, everything is an idea. Now, he wasn't asking that as a question. He made that as a statement of something he heard, but it sounded like something to me that would be interesting to lay on the table and get your comments on.
Yes, and really, it's a good statement because it brings out a couple of different concepts. Essentially, now, first of all, what we're looking at there, that particular statement is what we would call a philosophical statement. It is not a scientific statement. And oftentimes these two are presented, philosophy is often presented to the public as science, when in fact it really isn't. So if we take a look at it, it says everything comes from nothing. First thing we have to do is define what everything is, very specifically, which is kind of how my work differs from a lot of others. It comes from nothing. And again, nothing is something that needs to be specifically defined in a scientifically meaningful terms. That there are 12 dimensions. Okay, well, if there are 12 dimensions, let's define what a dimension is. And then let's see how we come up with the number 12. And if our physical reality of 4 dimensions that we normally experience physically with our senses and measure with our instruments and observe, and if someone is then saying that that 4-dimensional reality emerges from the other 8 dimensions, then physical reality must not come from nothing, but something, because the other 8 dimensions have to be something. If they were nothingness, if they were zero, they would not be a dimension. At the highest level, everything is an idea. That's philosophical. How do we define an idea scientifically? What does that mean? For an example, in my work, I call that a supergeometric pattern. That's something we can reckon with scientifically. What's an idea? We have no scientific definition for what an idea is. And so I'm not refuting this statement or anything in it, but it's a good example, Royce, to show how we have to bring critical thinking to any kind of these concepts to extract ourselves out of the religious / metaphysical / philosophical stalemate, so to speak, and elevate ourselves to a scientifically relevant conversation.
So how would you express, since there's no scientific equivalent for an idea, how would you express the concept to where it could be used or is there a way to do that in a scientific field or, say, study?
Well, the first thing that we need to do, I believe, is to take a look at the scientific understanding or definition of what the term information means. Because any time that we're talking about an ordered structure or an ordered blueprint or an ordered set of laws and principles, we're really talking about what science considers to be information, quote unquote. And as so often is the case, science will use terms that we also use in our everyday language, but they'll have a slightly different meaning. So information essentially is the blueprint for physical reality and everything that's in it. It's some people have compared it to information like data on a computer's hard drive, and there are some similarities, but that's a little bit too oversimplified. Give you an example. Back in school, we were all taught, at least back when I was in school, I understand they don't teach what they used to, but I was taught the conservation laws in physics, that matter and energy, or we should say more accurately, mass and energy, can neither be created nor destroyed. And I think most of us have heard of that before. What the concept of information says is that it's actually an extension of those conservation laws that say the information from which mass and energy is assembled and structured and designed, itself can neither be created nor destroyed. And that extension to those conservation laws is what's known as quantum unitarity. And so the problems, for example, Royce, that we have today with models of black holes, like the Hawking model, and there's about 4 or 5 other ones that propose what actually goes on inside of the astronomical objects we call black holes. That the problem with all of them is they require the destruction of information. And so consequently, our models can't be exactly right of how reality is put together within those particular structures, because they require the violation of a physical law that we know to be true. So if we're going to bring the concept of thought or idea into the realm of physics, which is really where we're going to figure out how everything works, we have to take a look at thoughts and ideas as collections of coherent information. And, of course, this is one of the problems that we've had traditionally, Royce, with interdisciplinary exchanges of concepts, that psychology and parapsychology, for example, there's a distinct difference in that discipline and the discipline of physics. And physicists, as a general rule, do not wish to drift over to that other discipline. There are lots of challenges to that they really are not equipped to overcome. So in order to build these bridges and actually create a unifying theory of everything, which conceptually is what supergeometry is, we have to break down these barriers between psychology, for example, or medicine and physics. And this is one of the ways that we can do it. By understanding ideas or thoughts as coherent, organized patterns of information, we now have made a very solid bridge between that area of study and mainstream physics. And now we can begin to reckon with both fields in that area as if it were one. And ultimately we know they're one because of physics is ultimately the description of everything that's physical. The brain is physical. So psychology must someday fall under physics. And these are the bridges that we can build to make this workable and understandable and discussable and debatable and all those things.
Doesn't that get to be confusing for people going through college trying to learn scientific methods?
Well, the scientific method is fairly simple, but you're right in one aspect that when we go to university to learn a particular trade or a particular discipline, really the ultimate idea is to be able to take that degree, take that education, and apply it within the field that it is related to, ultimately to get work, to get a job in that field. And so consequently, what we would study in physics, we wouldn't really play with medicine very much at all. And so, yes, to make these crossovers could be very confusing. But the ultimate search is for a new paradigm, a different way of looking at reality than what we look at now. And with that new paradigm, things can become quite simple. For example, for centuries, we have observed earthquakes. We've observed volcanoes. And we really, really didn't know what caused them. We had it's kind of like paranormal phenomena, Royce. We have all these observations over decades of all these different phenomena. And we have a pretty good solid catalog of those events, of what occurs. But we really had no idea what the underlying mechanism was. And so it's the same with earthquakes and volcanoes. Then, in the late 50s, early 60s, there were a couple of geologists that took another look at a very, very old idea that goes back hundreds of years. And that was the idea that the continents actually were once joined and drifted apart.
Pangea theory.
Exactly. It can be called by actually, I think the first recorded or written account of this theory was from Sir Francis Bacon, believe it or not.
I'm familiar with him. He's the one that wrote New Atlantis.
He went into some very interesting ideas in his time. And that was a while back. But what they discovered when they took another look at this is they came to the understanding that the continents are on these giant plates, and the plates are moving across the crust of the Earth, and they collide with each other, and they cause these earthquakes. and they're responsible for volcanoes. And now that here's a concept that up until that time had thwarted some of the greatest minds in the field. And now, with the idea of plate tectonics, a school child could explain the basics to you, whereas before it was a complete mystery to all the greatest minds out there. Furthermore, with plate tectonics, we got an added bonus. We also discovered through that how mountains were formed, whereas before there was very little evidence to suppose that mountains had anything to do with earthquakes or volcanoes. And again, a school child could describe that today. So what we're looking for in the field of physics and in the field of paranormal research and all these other things is a new paradigm that brings all these things together and presents an idea that says, oh, how simple. How could it have been any other way? This is so obvious. How did we miss it for thousands of years? And some people do believe, including myself, that my supergeometric theory is the first step in that process.
Are we getting back to a like everything coming from a singularity?
Well, we haven't really established science hasn't really gotten away from that idea. There's been some interesting philosophical speculations from time to time, but predominantly we still adhere to and find more and more evidence all the time for the Big Bang Theory, which means that the universe, the physical universe, began as a quantum singularity that somehow exploded and opened up and emerged as the physical universe that we know. And in fact, the Big Bang Theory is fundamental to supergeometrics. And this is where we can get into bringing all these things together. But the first thing we need to do when we're talking about the beginning of the universe and a quantum singularity is, once again, Royce, we need to define what quantum singularity means.
Okay.
And for the general public, I mean, if you talk to me about brain surgery, I'd be an idiot. I'd know, well, gee, you open up the brain, you do surgery on it. I don't know, but I wouldn't know anything about it. Physics is the same kind of thing. If you're not involved with it, you really don't know what the fundamentals of it are. I don't even know very much about bricklaying. I know you use bricks and mortar, but ask me to build a brick wall and I get fired in about 7 minutes. So
unless you're actually directly involved, you only get glimpses, in other words.
Yeah, and the guy could ask me to hand him a left-handed Wiebelfetzer, and I'd look at him like he was from Mars. I have no idea what he's talking about. So singularity is the same kind of thing. What does singularity mean? Well, in the physical universe, we have a multiplicity, or what Einstein called variants or variables. And in the physical universe, we have 4 variants. They are height, width, depth, and time. This is Einstein's concept of space-time, which superseded the Newtonian concept that not only were space and time separate things, but Isaac Newton said space was an empty nothingness that was occupied by material that moved through time. That was the Newtonian cosmology. The Einsteinian cosmology says that no, space is a substantive field. It's actually a substance. And it is characterized by these 4 variables, height, width, depth, and time. A singularity has no variables. It is all collapsed into a singular coordinate. And therefore, it cannot be physical. So what the Big Bang tells us is that before the beginning, and we have trouble even talking about it. When you notice I said the word before?
Right.
That's a temporal indicator. I'm talking about time when I say the word before. And yet I am trying to speak about before time existed. So you can't even talk about it intelligently sometimes without a common agreement as to what terms you're going to use and what they're going to mean. But to use the best that we have available to us, before the universe, there was this quantum singularity. And there was no height, width, depth, or time. So consequently, if it's all collapsed into a single coordinate, it cannot be physical. Because everything that's physical is defined by four-dimensional space-time. That actually is the fabric, the scaffolding in which everything in physical reality is embedded and interwoven. So this is, this is the basic physics understanding of it. Now, the singularity that wasn't physical exploded. It expanded into something. And this goes to the statement that was made in the chat room before, that everything came from nothing. Technically speaking, that singularity was no thing. To expand the word nothing, break it up and say no thing. Because a thing must have height, width, depth, and it must move through time. So, in a sense, it was no thing. But it was something. It was something other than a nothingness, in a sense. What we would call, what I call supergeometric, or what some have called, John Wheeler called it pre-geometric. David Bohm, physicist David Bohm, one of the most prominent physicists in the 20th century, called it implicate order. That gave rise to explicate order. And so everything came out of this. But what we don't talk about too much in the Big Bang Theory, because it's very disquieting and it threatens the predominant paradigm, is that all the information that was to determine what the physical universe was going to be was also contained in that quantum singularity. And this is something you'll see physicists rarely talk about, because it not only threatens the paradigm of materialism, which predominates physics today, but it hints at the existence of what we call God. Because in it was an order that predated the physical, and in fact the physical emerged from that order. Therefore, we would have to assume, based on the concept of systems and subsystems, and I'm going to take an offshoot for a second, Royce, on this and come back, because this is important for people to understand. In physics, and again, Royce, I am always trying to drag the philosophical, metaphysical, religious concepts into science and express them in scientific terms. There is an understanding in science today that's universally accepted that we study systems and their subsystems. So, for example, if we had a system of an automobile, if we looked at an automobile and we said, this is a system, then we're going to look at things like the brakes, the fuel system, and all that are actually subsystems to the main system. What we do when we study a system is that we lay out we determine a set of laws and principles. We lay out a set of principles and laws and rules that establish, determine, and govern the system that we're studying. We have to really define the system. And then we can study the subsystems that emerge from that system. But the rule is that a subsystem will never behave or turn into something that is contrary to or outside of or transcends the system in which it is a part.
The part is never greater than the whole.
Exactly. And in physics, the parts are, when you add them together, the sum total does equal the whole. When the sum total of the parts equal more than the whole, then we have described the whole wrong. You see what I mean? So, if we take a look at the universe is a system. And in it, we not only have order and structure and information, very specific orders. For example, And again, the philosophical idea, you folks that, that have heard that, anything's possible, and you've heard the quantum philosophy gobbledygook. The reality is this, that we've learned enough now to know that 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen can bind in a molecule that we call H2O. In the presence of sufficient gravity to pool those molecules into a single location, and if they exist at standard temperature and pressure, will create a clear liquid we call water. Anywhere in the universe, those conditions exist. Anywhere and everywhere in the universe, those conditions will create a clear liquid we know as water. It's not going to create a transistor radio in another galaxy somewhere. Or what I'm fond of saying, you're not going to put your Thanksgiving turkey in the oven and pull it out 3 hours later to find a Wankel rotary engine. It's just the universe acts in a very constrained way. There are fixed sets of laws and principles. So if the universe emerged from the singularity, that order must have been embedded into that singularity. Now, let's take a look at ourselves, for example. Let's take a look at the human being, more specifically, the human brain. The human brain is intelligent. Although some might argue with that, we're certainly more intelligent than a rock.
At least some of us, huh?
Yeah, intelligence is relative, but we know we're more intelligent than an inanimate object. Excuse me. The physical brain is a subsystem of the physical universe. That means the physical brain cannot operate in a way, Royce, that exists outside of or transcends the physical laws of the system in which it is a component, in which, that the main system that gave rise to it. Therefore, if the human brain is intelligent, the universe also has intelligence built into it. Now, I have just stated something that has been expressed for centuries in a religious way, a philosophical way, a metaphysical way. I have just expressed it, finally, in a physically relevant, scientifically meaningful way that I challenge any physicist in the world to sit down at a table with me and debate that I'm wrong. All I've done is go to a place that they're very afraid of and they don't want to go. And so now we know that the universe is intelligent. And that intelligence, if the universe has intelligence built into its order, then that order must have come from the information that was within the quantum singularity. And what are we talking about? We're talking about intelligent design. That the singularity itself had intelligence in it, which smacks so much of God that people would have to actually put the blinders on to ignore it. And yet, for the first time, it's been phrased in a scientifically compelling argument.
Now, real quick, I want to remind everybody that we're in Studio A. The call-in number is 347-688-2902. That has got to be the most scientific case I've ever heard for the existence of God that I can think of.
Yeah, it puts the discussion on a scientific foundation. Now, people can debate, well, is that God, when you say the word God, does that correspond with any kind of a religion? And that's a completely different discussion altogether. Einstein believed not. Einstein believed that he didn't believe in any religion in the world. But he did call who we are talking about, or what we are talking about, the lawgiver. He called this thing the lawgiver. He said anybody who studies physics and looks out at the universe and fails to see some great spirit that is much higher than humanity at work in it is just not paying attention. And he would make these little comments here and there, like quantum physics is impressive, but I don't believe God rolls dice. So, yes, it begins the discussion. Okay, call it implicate order that David Bohm spoke of. Talk about pre-geometry as John Wheeler, or David Finkelstein talked about coherent superpositions, or Thomas Fusco talks about supergeometric patterns.
Title's not important. What it actually does is what's important.
It's the concept. And the fact that we now have another bridge, Royce, we have a bridge that's built between two disparate disciplines that we can phrase in a way where both things, where the single statement is meaningful to both disciplines in their own existing terminology. We've built a bridge. And that's why the subtitle of my book, Behind the Cosmic Veil, is called A New Vision of Reality Merging Science, the Spiritual, and the Supernatural, because it builds these kinds of bridges and allows us to freely talk between disciplines about concepts using the exact same meaningful terminologies, and find that we have relevance between these, that there's a significance through all these disciplines with these concepts.
Well, what does this concept and theory do with the old chicken and the egg adage? I mean, you backed it up to an idea or to information, but doesn't the information have to also come from somewhere?
Well, absolutely. And what I talk about, and of course the chicken and the egg are co-evolutionary. They're co-existent. So consequently, there is a higher pattern or a blueprint of information that dictates both the chicken and the egg simultaneously. One doesn't exist without the other. See, the only problem we get into these these mental roadblocks, these mental paradigm roadblocks, what came first, chicken and the egg, is because we're working under the materialistic paradigm that everything is physical, that reality is all that's physical and there's nothing more to it. And that's what creates very crazy concepts like string theory and brain theory and all that. But to get to the point, what I say is that there is a super physical, means above the physical. Again, using scientific terms, a super physical extension or overlay to physical reality, where physical reality actually emerges from this non-physical aspect or dimension of reality, if you will. And again, this is not in itself a new concept, Royce. What I'm doing is building it together with a collection of scientifically meaningful arguments and with available evidence in order to form this model. And that the quantum singularity that began the Big Bang, that the Big Bang emerged from, was a supergeometric structure. It existed in a place where all physical dimensions were folded in on themselves into a single coordinate. And when this expanded, that the information unfolded along with the three-dimensional waves that were ultimately to become the substance of reality, which in a sense brings us back to the old Eastern physics, the ancient Eastern physics, which was called Wu Li. And that was translated, we're talking about form and substance, where the substance of a snowflake is the ice, the water, and its form is the crystalline shape. So we're looking at both form and substance. The form is the information, and the substance is what we call, unknowingly in physics, wave functions that collapse into a definite particle at a particular location. We've always considered wave functions to be hypothetical, mathematical abstracts. I argue that they actually represent a part of reality that we cannot directly observe, but we can mathematically reckon, and with those mathematics actually come up with a resultant, which is physical reality.
Okay. Now, I don't want to get into anything too greatly involved because I know we're going to get interrupted here in about roughly 5 minutes. But one of the things I was going to mention that I was talking to a guest about just, I want to say was last week, we were talking about space and time. I think it was Timothy Schwartz was my guest at the time. And we were making the comment about Einstein's theory of space-time because, let's face it, if you take two chairs and you start to separate them, the more distance you put between them, that's more space, and in that way you have to have more time to walk further across to the new location of the chair that's further apart. So you can see where they're conjoined in that area or in that method. In the same token, though, if you take a ball and you put it out in the middle of your driveway and you don't touch it for a year, it can exist in that one space without taking up any kind of time whatsoever. So then you got to ask yourself, are the two connected, or is there a different kind of interplay that's kind of partly connected?
Well, one of the mind traps that we human beings always fall into, it seems, is what I call an egocentric look of reality.
Okay.
We, in our brains, are somehow the definition of the reality that's around us. Let me ask you this. Let's take a distance. Let's fly up about 50 miles above the surface and take a look at that ball on your lawn. Is it stationary? It's moving through space and time.
With the Earth, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, that ball will never be in the exact same geophysical coordinate that when you first placed it, the first attosecond that it was placed on that lawn. It will never be in that position again. So that's it's an oversimplified and egocentric and consequently false model of reality. Unfortunately, there's so many concepts that people read about out there that start with these kinds of fallacious premises. And then they build a whole fantastical belief system based on a concept that was false from the beginning, but everybody's accepting as true.
Isn't that happening in science an awful lot today?
It happens on both sides of the coin, Royce. It happens in both the mainstream and in the alternative, although it happens far more often in the alternative fields. I could name you hundreds of different concepts that begin with a false premise, that once you accept that false premise, then you are led to believe this whole system that was built upon it. It's like I commented the other day to somebody, Lewis Carroll's book. What if we accept as true that Alice actually did pass through the looking glass? Oh my, we've just changed our model of reality. But that would be a false premise.
Because we know people can't just go through a looking glass.
Well, if we assume that they can, that changes everything. So, for example, and I know we're about to go on break, but real quick, I was commenting on something, this was a couple months ago online. Somebody showed this video that said that, the character Jesus Christ was actually created by the Roman Empire for some sort of purpose, that they completely fabricated. But one of the premises was that the origins of Christianity are shrouded in mystery. And I said, whoa, they're not shrouded in mystery. We know exactly how Christianity originated. So here we get this false premise, or when you see on Ancient Aliens, where they show the platform of Baalbek made out of these giant stones, where the spaceships land on it, and these stones are hundreds of tons and couldn't have been moved by humans. There is no platform at Baalbek. There is none. There are 3 giant stones in a retaining wall that we know why they were put there, and we know who put them there, the Romans. And so they start this false premises, and humans couldn't have built Baalbek and this and that. And you got thousands of people believing in this when the premise statement is false. It's a hoax.
Okay.
This is why people get mad at me sometimes.
Okay, well, I tell you what, we're going to have to take this in here up after break. I just heard the music. I was just thinking about what you were saying. Don't let me forget when we come back where it was at, because if I have to sit too long, I might forget. Be back in a few, everybody.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Hello, I'm Benjamin.
And I'm Jasmine.
We are inner tour guides with black belts in the art of self-awareness and how to live a passionate life.
We love talking with you about what you have and what you want.
More importantly, we want to explore with you how to bridge the gap between that wanting and bring it right back to the having.
So what are your hopes, dreams, and desires?
Is it money, love, success, health, wealth, or something even more specific?
Let us guide you through the exciting adventure of turning what you want into what you have.
Come join in the conversation on our show, The Inner Revolution.
We look forward to exploring with you.
The finder of lost children and missing persons. Monique Lassan. Surveilling civil and criminal investigations. I investigate.
No, I am the chosen one.
Do not underestimate the power of good, and do not dismiss the strength of the child.
Yes, every Wednesday evening on Revolution Radio, come join our very own Eye Investigatrix, Monique Lassan, with her private Eye X-Files.
So you're the finder of lost children?
Private Eye X-Files, every Wednesday from 10 to midnight Eastern, Studio B, on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
I realize it's very hard for you to take in. What is your destiny to find the golden child?
Moscow's freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. The heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting to danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio!
Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
He wants a challenge. Let's give him one.
The voice that whispers in your ears are the screams that you fear. The mind you cannot defy is the heart that rules mankind. The people who made you are the gods that will save you. I am Steve Travesty. I am the voice. The ghost in the machine. Ghost in the Machine, Tuesdays, 8 p.m., Studio A.
Right here, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Talk Now Radio, brought to you by Revolution Radio. Don't forget that both shows are indeed listener-supported, so if you get a chance to click on a banner or drop a donation or anything you could do to help, it helps keep us sponsor-free so that we can bring you information that some parties may not want brought, in other words. So before we left, we were just starting to get into a conversation about Christianity and whether or not it was shrouded in mystery when the commercial music came in or the break time music came in. And this show was not really meant, I don't think, for religious conversation in this particular episode. However, if my guest doesn't mind straying away for just a minute, I'd like to have him clear up what he means by Christianity is not a mystery, especially after during break time I was reading what was said in the chat room, as there could be more than one story, and there might be something going on here that I'm not aware of. So, Thomas, would you mind taking a detour real quick to kind of help clear some of this up?
Well, the point, the reason why I had brought that up is that it was I was addressing a couple months ago a false doctrine or a false theory that was based on a false premise that several statements were made at the beginning of this person's presentation that were false. They just weren't true. And because, again, referring back to what we were talking about earlier, that if someone isn't skilled in a particular discipline, they wouldn't really know that the statements were false. Once those false statements were accepted as being true, then the quote-unquote theorist, or I would say most accurately the notionist, will develop their notion based on these false premises, and people will go, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. That's really cool. I dig that. When, in fact, it's just a big old house of cards. And, you know, from a historical reference or a historical point of view, the origins of Christianity are not a mystery. We know them quite well. Is Jesus independently documented in other writings? Well, you know, marginally, yes. But specifically for that time, no. But if you think about it from the Roman perspective, Jesus was just one of a handful of Jewish troublemakers in Jerusalem. And there was always talk of raising a army and rebelling against the Romans. And there were a number of religious-like leaders of the time that were preaching these kinds of things. The Romans just thought Jesus was another one of these kooks, and so they crucified him because he was causing trouble during the Jewish holiday where all the people came in Jerusalem, and they had to maintain order. To the Romans, he was just simply another thug, another miscreant that they took care of. So at the time, would he be recorded in any big history? No, nobody had a clue that it would turn into what it ultimately did. So people take advantage of those gray areas and, propose a concept that is false. We do know what went on, that there was this person who apparently existed and did the things that he did. Otherwise, we would never heard of him. And a religion grew up around it. And, most historians accept the writings of Paul, most of the writings of Paul, as not only genuine, but also having been written by the person they're attributed to. That Paul was a very real human being. Whereas for the Gospels, for example, we believe today that they were pseudonymous, which was very common back at that time. Somebody else wrote them, and an apostle's name was assigned to them. As we believe that most of the letters in the New Testament and some documents in the Old Testament, like the last part of Isaiah, what we call Deutero-Isaiah, which was not written by the same author, but is tagged onto the book. Paul was actually a real person, and he actually wrote most of those letters that are attributed to him. At least historians accept that. And so if we're going to accept that, we accept Paul's writings with the same credibility that we would accept Josephus's writings, who was a historian back at that time. We don't question that Josephus did exist or not. We know that he tried to accurately portray the history of the world that he knew at the time. So Christianity was definitely well established at the time of Paul's writing. So we do know how it happened. And as Terrell said in the chat room, he was talking about the idea of the Jewish temple and the processes, the rituals that occurred in the Jewish temple. The Temple of Solomon, and then we have the Temple of Herod, which is also never quoted by the ancient alien people, because there are huge monoliths in the foundation of the Temple of Herod. And they were also used as a retaining wall. They were built by my ancestors, the Romans. And the ancient aliens won't talk about them because they know darn right well that we all know where they came from. That's a little offshoot, too. So no, there is no big mystery here as far as how that religion got started and how it was the natural outcrop of the Jewish traditions of the temple and the Holy of Holies and all the things that were necessary to absolve sin, which was a big deal. Some people, you're right, Christianity introduced this concept of sin and we don't like it. And no, that came from Judaism. And it was very serious. Remember that humanity was kicked out of the Garden of Eden because of sin. And so when you understand all this, you understand that Christianity was an outcome, a culmination of these particular beliefs in Judaism, which is why the Christians, the first Christians being Jews, were accepted in the synagogue. And they were able to go to synagogue and to debate. They were able to go in the temple because they were considered a branch of Judaism, until it came to time where the Jews basically got together and said, these guys are heretics, they have nothing to do with us. That was around the same time as the Jewish uprising in 70 A.D., and that's when the Christians became expelled from the Jewish world. So again, we're all talking about history, and we're actually talking about as you said, an area that doesn't relate to my work directly, but it's important to know that when you see a lot of these theories out there, check the premises, check the statements that the theory is based upon. Do the research on them, and you'll find, sadly, much more often than not, that those premises are false. They're outright lies. And so the resulting theory that's built upon them has got to be false also.
Okay, now that leads me to a question that's kind of going gradually off of the religious attribute onto the scientific again, if you want to look at it that way, I suppose. But, you know, in the biblical teaching, there's a concept of the Christ, which is the anointing of the Holy Spirit, basically. Does that play a role in your supergeometric theory of everything?
Well, gosh, does it play a role? It doesn't necessarily play a role in its foundation, in the way that the theory has been put together, has been come upon, but it does give us a way to form a bridge between a scientifically meaningful theory and some of these concepts in religion, let's say Christianity, for example. And we'll talk about this, and I want to see if I can parlay this into talking more about the theory.
Well, I was going to try to do the same thing.
Yes. Well, we're on the same page here. Let's think about what is called mystical Christianity. Christian mysticism, which really, if you think about it, Christianity is a mystic religion. It's based on mysticism and almost magic, so to speak. And I don't mean that in a bad way. You know, I'm talking about that it's not a mundane religion. That, you know, if you take a pile of dirt and you take a eye of newt and all this and you mix it together, you get a love potion or something. I don't know. Excuse me. When we get into mystical Christianity, let's think about this for a moment. The first paragraph of the Gospel of John, he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, when we look at the underlying Greek, the Greek word that's used for word is logos, L-O-G-O-S. We have no English equivalent. We have no exact translation. It has traditionally been translated in English as word, W-O-R-D, with a capital W. In the Old Testament, the same concept was understood as the wisdom of God. Christianity calls it the Word of God. All right? And then it says, I should say, what logos means in the ancient Greek philosophy is mind, thought, order, pattern, matrix. This is what it means in philosophical Greek. The term dates back about 500 years before it appears in this gospel.
Sounds like everything that was in the very beginning of your singularity.
Exactly. Now we have a scientific way to bridge that gap. And John continues. He says, all things were made through him. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. So here we have a model or a description, a religious description, that says the exact same thing, almost word for word, as supergeometric theory does, which is not necessarily based on that premise. It can be based entirely on observation. It can be spoken of completely from a scientific viewpoint and be just as valid without discussing any religious aspects to it at all. Paul adds to it. He says something very similar. Although with the dating of the documents that we accept today, Paul's writing actually predates the Gospel of John. Paul said he is the image of the invisible God. He is the visible image of that which we cannot see. The firstborn of every creature. Now again, you have to understand what the translations are. today, most of the modern English translations say he is the firstborn of all humanity, of all creation, firstborn of everything in the universe. But that's not what the older translations say. It says he was the firstborn of every creature, which means the first electron that came into existence, the first created thing. The blueprint for it was in Christ. And in fact, this is what Christ, from a mystical sense, actually means. Jesus is the human personification on earth of Christ, which is the Word, which is the Logos. He said, and in him all things hold together, which is, again, consistent with the scientific concept of information, that what we were talking about, some of the problem with the theories of black holes, is when information is destroyed, the mass and energy that is defined by information is also destroyed. And consequently, it violates our laws of conservation that we know to be true. So that's how it relates. And then when we talk about the arguments that information had intelligence built into it, that's what the Bible says. You know, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and it was void and formless. It was basically formless matter. And what shaped it into the form that it took was that God, the Creator, spoke the word, light. And the actual structure of that light came into existence. The Jews believed, the ancient Jews believed, that their alphabet were all kind of puzzle pieces. They were kind of cookie cutters of God. And each letter created a certain pattern in physical reality. And when you combine these letters, those patterns would combine together to create the object that the word described. And lots of Christians don't know this. They don't understand the history behind it. But that's how it relates to my theory.
Well, you know, the more I'm listening to you here, what's coming to my mind is exactly that, mind. What holds information but the mind?
Exactly.
So the Logos being the mind of God, or Christ being the mind of God. This is what information is where everything starts. Would that be a pretty correct assessment or no?
Yes, this is the mystic understanding. They would not have used the terminology and the concepts that we can today because they didn't have it. We're dealing with vocabularies that maybe consisted of 3,000 words. It's very difficult for us in modern day to understand how primitive these languages were even a couple thousand years ago. And the vast majority of the people who were involved in all of this belief were illiterate. They were not educated. They didn't know how to read or write. This is why in Revelation, where it says in the beginning, and again, most Christians would read it and miss the historical content, it talks about the being blessed, the people that read these words and the people that hear these words. And they don't realize what it's referring to is that you had a congregation of how many tens, dozens, hundreds of people that were completely ignorant. And that there was someone who knew how to read standing at the altar or the podium or wherever they were reading the Apocalypse of John. So he read them, he read the words, and the people were hearing the words as he read them. And that's what that phrase means. Without understanding the historical content, people read right over that and don't know what it's referring to.
Which accounts for a lot of false doctrine inside the pulpits of the churches today.
Well, absolutely. I mean,
erroneous thinking.
Yeah, or, certain assumptions that were made. There's a number of doctrines that circulate in Christianity today that did not exist in biblical times. One of them was the idea of a glorified Satan, Lucifer, that sinned against God and fell from grace. That didn't exist in biblical times. That was developed later. The idea of what's it called? Where all these people are supposed to disappear from earth. I can't remember the name of it. That's a 19th century creation. The rapture, that's what they call it. That didn't exist in biblical times either. That was.
There was no such word, in fact.
And there was no such concept. It was understood when Jesus in Matthew talks about, two people will be standing in a field and one will disappear. He was relating it to Sodom and Gomorrah, where the people who disappeared were the bad guys. They were the ones that got bombed, So, you got a lot of things, and gosh, we could talk for many, many hours for this.
I'm sure of that.
Another thing is that, again, with this fallen Lucifer, many Christians will quote Genesis, and they say that, it reads that God created this and saw that it was good. And they'll say, see, everything was good and pure. Sin only came later. But they don't know the underlying Hebrew. The Hebrew word is tob, and it's used consistently in those age texts, including the Old Testament, to mean exemplary, excellent, a job well done, with absolutely no moral connotation to it whatsoever. That when God created this and saw that it was good, it just means that he saw he did a good job. It doesn't mean that there was all good and no evil until later. It doesn't mean that.
Actually, it did mean that, then it wouldn't have been so good to begin with, because you can't appreciate the good without knowing the bad.
Yeah, and in the Old Testament, in the old Jewish religion, it was understood that evil came from God.
Actually, that is very true. I swear, I remember reading a passage in Isaiah once where Jesus said, "Yea, I, Yahweh, create the evil and the good. I do all these things." But when I went back to find it later, even though I had a clear memory of reading it, I couldn't find it.
It's from Isaiah.
That's what I said.
The Jews considered Isaiah the greatest prophet because he spoke in the person of God with a kind of authority that no other prophet ever did. And, basically God is speaking through Isaiah and saying, I'm the Lord. I'm the big shot. Who do you think you're dealing with? I create evil. I create good. I create the light and the darkness. I create the weal and woe. Who is it but me? And that's what he speaks from Isaiah. When Saul was misbehaving, God sent him an evil spirit. And even in Genesis, it says the serpent in the garden was more cunning and crafty. And of course, we understand in Revelation at the end, they call Satan the ancient serpent. And this is the one. The serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field that the Lord God had made. So there's a lot of things that float around in Christianity today that do pervert the original understanding of the religion that all came later. But that's a religious discussion. We can have a separate show just on talking about those things.
We might want to do that one of these days.
But what I propose is this. If we had what I would call an area of absolute, and rather than talk about absolute good or absolute evil, I would rather take, and I try to take the Charles Fort's way of saying it, which would be a positive absolute and a negative absolute. And if we had an area where those two zones, can't even call them realms, because we're not talking about anything physical at all. If these two things came into contact with each other, they would create differences. The zone of conflict in the middle would create variations where none existed before. And from those variations could emerge the wave functions that give us ultimately frequency and amplitude. And think about this. Amplitude is dimension. That's height and length and width of a wave, is its amplitude. And frequency gives it time. That's the timing between each cycle of a frequency. And if those pre-dimensional waves became sufficiently dense, intensified, they would take on a velocity. And with increasing density, that velocity would ultimately reach down to the speed of light. And the second we hit light speed, luminosity, they would begin to unfold into time, space, mass, and energy that we know of today. And so this model extends beyond the physical to include these traditionally religious philosophical concepts, just expressed in a different way.
You mentioned luminosity. Reaching the speed of light, luminosity. And that just brought to my mind Jesus' transfiguration on the Mount. Could there be such a thing as a transfiguration if a person knew how to reach the speed of light?
Well, if we're talking about radiance, luminosity, and I'm going to work my way back into this if I can. We know that on occasion, paranormal phenomena is associated by luminous phenomena. Now, there's nothing present in the haunted room that can generate light, and yet it's observed. So luminosity can seemingly appear from midair, if that's what you actually mean. If you're going to go into the religious connotation of it, I think I probably don't want to go any further.
Okay.
Enough about it.
Okay. So how then does the supergeometric theory of everything explain, say, like ghost and psychic abilities, etc.?
Good. This is where, if we trace back, because, honestly, I mean, we did a pretty good job, even with the Christianity aspect of it. We were still talking primarily about information, which is what's important, because when you read about all the different ideas with paranormal phenomena, and I know, Royce, you've been interviewing people for years on this. You've heard it all, man, over and over again. They'll talk about spirit energies, and they'll talk about vibrations and feelings and emotions and all this. But the one thing they never talk about is information.
That is very true.
And because of that, they're missing the boat. They're working under a false or an incomplete paradigm, and so their minds are stymied, just like the great minds for centuries were stymied by earthquakes and volcanoes, because they didn't understand the whole picture.
Kind of like making spaghetti but not adding the sauce.
Well, something like that, or not having the proper grill to press the spaghetti out of, so it just comes out in a big mess. Let's think about this. What I do is I divide paranormal phenomena into two classes: primary and secondary paranormal effects. The primary paranormal effect is actually the materialization of information. Think about it. When we're talking about primary paranormal effects, we're talking about visual phenomena, such as apparitions, perfect example, or disembodied voices. And I don't think anybody would argue that either one of those are a specific, coherent collection of information. What we're seeing is the materialization of information. So what that means then is that the secondary effects, the changes in temperature, the electromagnetic fields, the feelings of heaviness, the mystery breezes, all that, are the changes that are occurring in the local environment that bring about the conditions in which primary paranormal effects or the materialization of information occurs. So let's bring this back to my theory of information with the Big Bang. And the evidence of paranormal phenomena and a few other areas that we really don't have too much time to talk about, which would be quantum physics and certain aspects of the human psyche itself. But paranormal phenomena gives us an understanding, if we're going to accept this body of data, that information can still materialize from a non-local source, from something that's outside of local space-time. In my book that I'm working on now, I go through all the reasons why the belief that past events, like in residual hauntings, are recorded somehow on the background just simply can't be. When you stop and think about the physics of it, you're talking about a material that would be sensitive enough to record such information, to store it like a magnetic media or some other kind of storage media, and then to project it back in a geometric or geographic location within that house, project it like a movie projector, and actually pan it and make it move. Show me what wall boards or, floorboards or even the rocks underneath the ground. Show me where any of those could physically do that. So that idea that the information is stored somehow on the background is just one of these philosophical statements that actually have no foundation in fact whatsoever. Completely unscientific. But if we look at information coming from an outside location, that's exactly what happened in the beginning of the universe. Is that the information, the information that was to become a part of the physical universe came from outside of the physical universe. It wasn't physical yet. So it materialized in the Big Bang. And when I say materialized, I mean something that was immaterial was made material. It materialized. Now, according to physics, in the material paradigm, the universe is fully materialized. I have a different statement. In fact, this theory has led me to form the holy grail of TOE concepts, which is a single concept that a school child could understand that gives us a description of the universe. And that's never been done before. Einstein said it would be like that when somebody came up with it. And here's my statement. The universe is an expression of materialized and materializing information. The universe is an expression of materialized and materializing information. And the idea of the second half of that, materializing, is something that mainstream physics doesn't accept, that they believe that the universe is fully materialized. However, there's these little bodies of evidence like paranormal phenomena that shows that the materialization process is still taking place and can occur. This gives us an answer, for example, that goes far beyond paranormal. It explains the expansion of the universe, that physicists not being able to explain that because they can't find a physical cause in the same universe for that effect, talk about this invisible stuff they call dark energy that is expanding the universe. But if the materialization process is still taking place, the substantive spatial field is still being generated, and therefore space is continuing to expand with the additional generation of space-time, of the space-time field. Again, when people talk about this, even in physics, they like to forget or disregard that space is a substantive field. It just is not a nothingness. When you have more space, something's generating. Now, if that's the case, then according to this theory, the testable predictions would be that at the onset of a paranormal phenomena, we would see a microcosm or a miniature of the same processes that occurred in the universe when it began. The first thing we had in the universe that all physicists agree upon is an expanding space-time bubble. Space and time emerged first, and it was in a bubble shape. So what if we had this to happen in miniature? in a haunted house, for example, the first prediction we would have is that we would be able to detect the emergence of a new gravitational field where one didn't exist before, because when space is curved, it creates a gravitational field, which is the work of Einstein. Again, his idea of the wormhole, the Einstein-Rosen bridge, was to overcome problems in a unified field theory that he was working on by creating a model for gravity that was not dependent on mass to generate it. It was a massless generation of gravity, which naturally emerged from the curvature of space. And so here, if we had this happen in a haunted house, we would see the emergence of a gravitational field. That is one of the predictions this model makes. It has been experimentally verified by David M. Roundtree. So one of my predictions right there, the experiment proved that that's what's happening. And no other model of the paranormal predicts an expansion of space-time. So my theory already blows away everything that came before it when it comes to paranormal phenomena. One of the things that happens with the expansion of space-time in the presence of physical content, which would be air, atmosphere, that type of thing, is that the physical content directly around the sphere of space or the edge of expanding space would be crushed. We know that to be true. We've done the studies, we've done the experiments. We know that bent space is crushed and contorted as opposed to flat space. So this physical content, rather than in the vacuum of the cosmos, it's happening inside a haunted house. These air molecules and atoms begin to get crushed, and they get excited. And what happens when you put stresses on those materials like that? The electrons that are orbiting the atom's nucleus jump into their higher valences, into their higher orbits. And so what we would predict is that an electromagnetic field would seem to appear out of midair. Now, go ahead. Now, what goes up must come down. So when these electrons expend their excitement, they drop back down into their lower orbits. And when they do that, they can emit two different things. They always emit heat. All electromagnetic fields emit heat, but they also can emit photons. This is one of these crazy quantum weirdnesses, that electrons can emit photons, which are particles of light. So here we have an electromagnetic field that is being passed through a physical substance that emits photons. That's how an LED works, guys.
That sounds, if you wanted to describe it in more layman's terms, sort of like an invisible bed sheet being pulled over somebody or over all of creation as we know it, kind of tucking us in at night, so to speak.
Hey, that's the cosmic veil. The book talks about what's behind the cosmic veil. But if people have been listening and visualizing what I'm saying, here we have a sphere of space-time, an expanded sphere of space-time, jacketed in an electromagnetic field and emitting photons. I have just given the world's first scientific definition, meaningful definition, of what paranormal investigators call a luminous orb. It's exactly what it would produce. It would produce the exact same phenomenon. And on and on and on. What we have a challenge with in physics, and when we talk about materialized information, we witness the majority of creation in a fully materialized state. And I liken it to standing on the side of a superhighway, watching cars go by at 75 miles an hour. This is how we witness the universe. We witness it in like this transportation system in its fully materialized state. What we cannot see when we're standing there is how that materialized. We can't see the mines that mined out the iron ore, or the refineries that refined the iron, and the ones that made it into steel, and the factories that shape it into fenders and nuts and bolts and quarter panels and all this. We can't see the aggregate company and how they made the tar and the asphalt that they came to lay on the road. We can't even see where the owner of the car got in it and began to drive it from their driveway into the neighborhood and getting on the on-ramp and driving up onto the highway and getting up to speed. All we can see from our perspective is a fully materialized state of reality. What I say is that paranormal phenomenon gives us the opportunity in real time to see the process of creation occurring in real time on a human scale and at a distance that's close enough to us physically that we can measure it and observe it and test it. And
kind of like viewing God's works from within, or His works from within.
I think that we are actually viewing and witnessing the very processes that brought the universe into being. And I maintain that those processes are still occurring. And what this does, this opens up all kinds of possibilities. But before I talk about that, real briefly, let's make me just mention a few other things about this expanding bubble of space-time within the physical content of air, for example. We're using the air inside of a room. What that would temporarily cause is a vacuum inside of it. Until the laws of equilibrium allowed the air atoms to jump over the hump of the bent space and occupy the inside of the bubble, we would have a temporary vacuum. That would cause a couple different things. It would cause a drop in barometric pressure, which has been measured and recorded at paranormal activity. We would notice a drop in temperature. There would be a cold spot that seems to just move around and then disappear. That's been recorded and observed at paranormal events. And by the way, having the heat signature on the outside of the bubble is the reason why we have this paradoxical observation that no other system explains, to how we can get a heat signature reading and a cold spot at the same time at a paranormal site. What the hell is going on? But this tells us how that could be so.
When you're getting the heat, hot and cold at the same time, is it possible there's like a portal or an opening right there between two different kinds of space?
Well, what we're talking about is an actual opening. This bubble act, which I call a differential field bubble, actually represents an opening to the superphysical overlay, the non-physical overlay that is extra-dimensional, that lies outside of space-time, but is connected to it. And then information can come through that portal. And once it sits inside this bubble, once information reaches inside of one of these bubbles, it begins to materialize. I mean, this is a crazy theory, crazy in the implications. It's absolutely fantastic because we're talking about a way that materialization can take place. So, for example, you have a vocalization, which is a collection of information. Let's say it exists non-physically, and it drops down into the physical world, becomes subluminal, inside one of these bubbles or these portals. Now, what happens? It begins to materialize. You can't see the vocalization, but what happens is that the outside of the bubble begins to vibrate with the frequency and amplitude of the emerging, materializing information of the vocalization. Now, if you recall, that bubble is jacketed by an electromagnetic field. So now what we have an electromagnetic field being propagated out into the surrounding environment, carrying the frequency and amplitude, the analog information of the emerging vocalization. The information in that electromagnetic form reaches a recording microphone. The field induces itself directly onto the acoustic coils. Those are the copper coils that surround the magnet. Normally, an acoustic sound reaches the microphone's diaphragm. It vibrates the diaphragm. The diaphragm moves the copper coil back and forth according to its vibrations. The copper coil is around a magnet, and that creates an electromagnetic field of a specific frequency and amplitude that is then translated by the device into a voice. What happens here in the paranormal event that I'm describing is that the modulated electromagnetic field induces itself directly on the copper coils. It bypasses the acoustic diaphragm because it's not an acoustic wave, it's an electromagnetic wave. It bypasses your eardrums because your eardrums aren't designed to pick up electromagnetic waves, just acoustic. The field goes into the device, it's translated into a voice, and we play it back, and we hear a voice recording where no one heard it acoustically. That's what creates EVPs. And on and on and on. This model I'm talking about, if we had another hour at this, it describes every primary and secondary paranormal effect that's observed at paranormally active sites. It covers the entire catalog. Plus, it addresses astrophysical issues like cosmic expansion, dark matter, and why there isn't one, why there's no such thing as a graviton, and on and on. It makes these kinds of predictions as well in mainstream physics.
Well, in order for this model to work, and I don't know as much about this subject as you do, don't get me wrong, which is why I'm asking questions. Does there need to be two different spaces to for this to work? The space that the material came from and the space that it entered into?
Well, what you're talking about, Royce, is a good example of what I talk about with materialism. All right, you mentioned two kinds of spaces. You're thinking about it materially because space is physical. And so this is that mental roadblock that limits our perceptions. It's not coming from quote-unquote space or another space. It's coming from a super-physical realm, something that's beyond the normal physical, where space doesn't exist. So it's not another space because that would be either a continuation of our same universe or another universe.
Well, I was going to suggest that if it did, my thoughts on it would have been like a space that had, emptiness, totally nothing. The space that our universe in is not empty. It's got a vacuum. It's not an empty vacuum. They found out recently it's full of energy, in other words. I meant something where, you didn't have anything recorded existing at all. But I'm not sure how that would work into the play either. And again, you're probably right. I probably am running at this here from a materialistic view.
Absolutely. When you're talking about, if you talk about energy being injected from another place, it's all material because energy is physical too. You're talking about other materials, that's physical too. This is a whole difference in this concept that think about the Big Bang. Think about material universe emerging from something that was not material, that was not physical, was not spatial, was not temporal. And then you begin to start aligning your thoughts in a way that more clearly expresses or more clearly perceives what the reality of paranormal phenomena really is, what's going on.
So, like you mentioned another realm where nothing of this exists. Is there a means of describing or identifying this other realm?
Other than to say that it has an implicit order, information that is not physical, and that it does have pre-physical substances in it, which are expressed by our mathematical formulas in quantum physics called wave functions, that we can't directly measure it and we can't directly observe it because it's not physical. But we can observe its results, its effects, and measure its effects. And from those effects, come up with a model of what it looks like. And again, it's difficult because we're dealing with something that isn't physical. We can't visualize it because everything we visualize is physical, because it's being visualized within a physical brain. But I can tell you this, if we here's a model that I like to use sometimes. It's not exactly accurate, but it conveys the right impression. Think of a bicycle wheel. And think about its hub with all of its spokes going out to the rim and the tire. Think about the tire as our physical universe, as physical reality. And think about these spokes as the, how would I say it, conduits into physical reality. And when those conduits empty into physical reality, we see the emergence of space-time bubbles of gravity, which surround all physical objects. And the hub is where all the pre-creational, the super physical stuff exists. Now, if you stood perfectly at the perpendicular to this wheel and turned it and was somehow suspended in air, the hub would look stationary. It would look like it was not moving at all. It would stay in the same place in the same time. And yet, as you go out to the rim, it increases in velocity and increases in spatial and temporal dimensions. And that's something like what we're talking about, where we have a bubble of space-time that's induced by a spoke that is emerging from the hub. And that spoke is created from that pre-dimensional wave functions, that formless matter, so to speak, that the Bible talked about. And then all the information exists in a database in that hub and trickles down that spoke, and as soon as it hits the rim of the tire, it materializes into full physical reality.
All right, and I think we've just about almost run out of time here on that one, Thomas. Before we get you out of here, real quick, you got anything you want to fill in that I didn't help you cover already?
Oh, boy. Oh, my. Just that what this does, this theory does, is it gives us a logical system to explain a lot of things. Not only the supernatural, but things in physics. For example, anybody that's heard anything about quantum physics knows about the uncertain way and the strange way that it works. It gives us a handle on this with this model, because now we can look at the quantum world as a process of the universe materializing. So it's not quite physical yet, but it's in the process of becoming physical. And that gives us a whole new avenue of exploration in the quantum physics. And it also tells us how this completely random, seemingly random, and bizarre and indeterminate world ultimately emerges as a completely determined world, where 2 atoms of hydrogen, 1 atom of oxygen, and standard temperature and pressure creates water anywhere in the universe that occurs. So this opens up a whole new world, not only for the paranormal, but for physics itself.
Okay, well, Thomas, I hate to interrupt you on that one there, but I can hear the music starting. I want everybody to know real quick, you can learn more again at www.cosmicveil.com. And don't forget to visit me at www.talknowradio.net. Y'all, please come see me this Saturday. I'm going to be, I had it a minute ago, but I closed it up. I put it in the chat room. Maybe I can find it. I'm interviewing, Brett Butler, I think is his name, about the divine within. So stop by, give us a visit, join the chat room. We'll see you then. Y'all be good. Bye-bye, everybody.
Revolution Radio.
These guys are hammers. And to hammers, everything looks like nails.
I heard that.
You were meant to. So you see something that's important, you call it out, and we'll make it happen.
Okay. Mother Nature is a serial killer. No one's better, more creative. Like all serial killers, she can't help the urge to want to get caught. What good are all those brilliant crimes if no one takes the credit? So she leaves crumbs. Now the hard part is seeing the crumbs for the clues they are. Sometimes the thing you thought was the most brutal aspect turns out to be the chink in its armor. And she loves disguising her weaknesses as strengths.
If you can fight, fight.
Head north if you can. Hello? Is there anyone out there hearing this?
Help each other.
Mexico City has been declared